Everybody looked at me after the merger was announced and said, "What does this mean?" Welcome to Executive Evolution. I have over 25 years of leadership experience in corporate America. I learned a lot of lessons the hard way, and I created this podcast so that you won't have to. The bank that we represented in the company that I ran was merging with another big bank all at the same time, and it happened, I found out, walking down a stairwell at a conference. And as soon as I got around my team, the first question they all asked me is, "What does this mean? I need answers. What's going to happen?" I didn't have answers. And so often in leadership, we don't have the answers right away. And we don't always have to have the answers right away. What we really need to do is to be able to set the stage, figure out what we can control, get the information that we need, and then start moving forward towards getting the answers, especially in the areas of things that we can control. That's one of the things that I talk about today in my interview with Sean McDonald, the president of MOR Associates. So let's jump right in and hear the story of his executive evolution. Sean, welcome to the Executive Evolution podcast.
Thank you, Craig. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here to hear the story of your executive evolution and how you've grown. As always, we jump right in with the lightning round. We've got 3 questions for you, and let's see where we go from there. It's never a very fast lightning round because I'm always too interested in your answers. So question number 1, what is the best leadership book you have ever read?
Before I answer that, I got to say, I've listened to a number of your podcasts. They're great. Thank you, Craig. But I keep wondering every time you say that, should you call it something else, Craig? Should you call the lightning round something else?
Or quit making the joke. One of those two things has to change. Yeah.
Either way, I'm ready. All right. So what's the best business book or leadership book?
Leadership book. Yep.
Yeah. I just finished reading or listening to Steal Like an Artist. And it was not a leadership book. It's a book more about creativity. And the very essence of the book was about learning from others. So kind of what you're doing here, Craig. But that's most recent. But I really liked it. But I would have to say, for me, again, not a leadership book, but does apply, would be James Clear's Atomic Habit.
Oh.
You know, what I really appreciate in that book is it sort of breaks down sort of the components of trying to get better, be a better leader. And so I think if you can master the ability to evolve your habits per your executive evolution concept, you know, we can continue to get better.
That's on my stack. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard a lot of good things. It's the first time it's come up here too. So
perfect. Yeah. After you take it in, let me know what you thought.
Yeah, it sounds like a good one. All right. Question number 2. Who is your leadership crush?
All right. Well, the terminology throws me off a little bit because this will sound weird if I say, my father, right?
Yeah.
You know, watching him in his journey has been something that I've been paying attention to. You know, we model leadership, not just in work, but at home. And so I think, trying to emulate him along the way has been what I've tried to do.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because I think, when you can show up and lead at work and show up and lead at home and teach your kids how to take on leadership roles, that's such a huge part of just kind of an integrity of your life where you can stay and then just see where it all goes. I'm always amazed to kind of see both the bad and the stuff that I'm probably sending my kids into therapy for in a few years, but also hopefully the good of, when I see the leadership in them or when they ask me questions, it's like, that's always great.
Right. Think about the lessons that we learn from people like that. We witness how hard they work, and that's a leadership competency, of course, work ethic, but the loyalty to people is what sort of stands out to me most. The type of almost heroic efforts that my father would go through to be there for other people is something that I've picked up on and is embraced as part of my leadership.
Yeah. And how we treat people and all that, through all aspects. Leadership is so transformative, both for our employees, but if we do it right, it's kind of everybody in our circle. And I know days I'm great at that and days I am really poor at that. So it's interesting. All right. And finally, and this coming on the heels of that question, in 10 words or less, how do you define leadership?
All right. Again, I feel like I'm breaking the rules here, because in our work, we encourage people to challenge their definition of leadership. And we find that people often come in with sort of a baked notion of what a leader is. And again, like you're doing here with executive evolution, we've got to break that mindset. And so I've given myself permission, Craig, not to have a definition of leadership. But I was preparing for this call and I said, okay, I know Craig's going to ask me this. And so I did recently break down leadership into three components: choice, movement, and impact, right? So on the choice side, we recognize that leadership is about making decisions, and it's about the inputs we have. It's about perspectives we gain, the people we meet, and sort of looking strategically ahead, right? And so that choice part is an important part of leadership. The second is can't stay an idea alone, right? It's about taking action. It's about movement. It's about persistence and conviction to engage others, because ultimately leadership and leading is about change. And as we think about change, that's the hardest part for people. And so how do we rally people? How do we help people through that change and in that movement process? And then ultimately impact is about results, right? That we've got to hit the results we're trying to hit and get to the places we're trying to go.
All those pieces are so important. And, when I think about impact, right, so many times I kind of drift on this podcast to the impact on the people. But if we're not impacting the business well and we're not making the right business decisions, I talked about this recently with somebody that it's just, look, if we don't have a business, we have nothing. All the empathic leadership in the world, all these great things we want to aspire to don't mean anything if we're not looking at our numbers, driving the business, making sure things are going in the right direction and having the impact we want to have. It's significant. We can't do the life-changing stuff if we don't get the business going where we need it to go.
Right. We do a lot of work with nonprofits, big nonprofits, higher ed and healthcare systems. And, nonprofit is a tax category, not a desire, right? So they too are businesses and they have to adopt that mindset.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes very big businesses. I mean, maybe the results or the way you measure results are different, but it can't just be this pie in the sky thing, right? We've got to, some of the, if you're a 10-person not-for-profit or, a huge one with huge assets, if you're not leading well and making tough decisions, I think it's hard. It's really hard.
As we're talking about it, it's probably why I use the word impact as that third word. Otherwise, it would probably squarely land on the word results. But I think in the nonprofit, realm of leadership, they have historically talked about impact versus results. But I think I'm, hand in hand there as we look at it.
It's funny you say that because I do like a strategic planning with businesses, including not-for-profits. And I always kind of push them to say, look, we've got to have 3 measurable financial resuls. Well, we want to talk about how many people we help. If we're not hitting our fundraising, if we're not making our revenue numbers, if we're not managing our expenses, there is no impact. And I'm not saying it's not important to think about how many people we're impacting on our mission, but our mission doesn't happen if we don't figure out the financial aspects. And that's why I really push them to put that first.
Yeah. You're right on it.
Because that's what makes it possible. And I don't know, you work with a lot of people in not-for-profits, and a lot of those people tend to be mission-driven people.
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting thing where maybe you have this great mission-driven nature, and then suddenly you realize you were great at it, and you're surrounded by all these people. Yeah. And nobody probably told them how to lead. Right. And what happens with them when you're dealing, is that something you see a lot with that segment?
Yeah, it keeps us busy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it reminds me of the airplane analogy, right? And this is really hard concept for people. You've got to put your mask on first before you put your mask on your own kid, right? There's certain types of people that are like, no way, I'm gonna rescue everyone else first. And that business mindset is really something that people need to spend time with, and which is why people have to embrace their own definition of what a leader is, right? They need to grow into it versus try to meet some bias or expectation.
Yeah. Good. Love it. All right. See, this is where we get dangerous. We're all over it, but it's great. All right. Let's reel it in. Let's go back, Sean, to your first leadership role. What was the first time you saw yourself sitting in that leadership chair?
Again, I went back and forth on this one. And so if you don't mind, I'm gonna dip into the personal, because again, I think on our leadership journeys, we learn so much from so many people and from so many situations. But if I go backwards, the first leadership role I feel like I had was when I was a kid. And for various reasons, work and health related, my parents gave me a lot of autonomy. I think that's the word we use in the business space. I had a lot of autonomy. And it's interesting to reflect on that, because sometimes you get thrust into leadership situations, leadership roles, whether you know it or not, and you have to figure it out, right? You have to make the best choices you can with the information you have, trying to get to the directions that you can. And ultimately the lesson for me as I look back at that one, and it's a huge one, especially as you think about the context that many people are navigating right now, that you can either let those situations define you or drive you. And I tell you, man, it's heavy if you let that stuff define you. And if you can let these things drive you to become a better version of yourself, to overcome these things, to embrace the people around you that think like you, or there's nothing that you can't do.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think there, when you go back and talk about your first leadership role as a kid, I would love to see the stats on this, and I don't even know how you do the study, but I remember like one of the first leadership roles I can remember was like in second or third grade, and it was a group project, right? Maybe it was fifth grade, but it was elementary school, right? And suddenly someone's going to have to step up and take the leadership role in that project, and you're either taking on all the work yourself and not delegating, you're dumping it all on everybody, you're yelling at people, who knows? But I would love to see like how those formative experiences kind of imprint on people of how they think about leadership later on in life.
I tell you, I'm fortunate to get to listen to a lot of people's leadership journeys, and we invite them to go, personal, professional, and it's more often than not, they go backwards into the personal around something that happened when they were in second grade or their parents, and it's fabulous. But, it transfers, right? So if I go back to that lesson and then link it to my first professional experience, I think about the crossover with autonomy. And, we're going to see more and more autonomy as we think about, what AI does to the number of, managers to direct reports, right? So more and more, we're going to see people have a lot more autonomy to lead from where they are. And so this lesson around, do you step into that moment or do you wait for direction? I think is going to be a lesson that many of us are just going to need to lean in on even further, right? How do you lead from where you are when you don't have a clear direction, when you don't have, traditional support structures?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, and do you think kind of as you're looking at that, it's going to be people having a lot more direct reports? They're going to get a lot less input?
Yeah. As you think about managers' roles, and we break the managers' roles down into, different aspects and tasks. As we think about what AI is capable of doing, I think if the average direct report line now is 7, I don't know the number, that, not too far off, it'll be, 25. And so the traditional tasks of a manager, I think, will evolve. And so the individual leader, through some AI supports, but also, digging in a little deeper, right? What do they say? It's not that AI is going to replace everyone's jobs, but those that know how to use AI will have an advantage, in this next chapter.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually have an AI coach I'm getting ready to start working with because in one phone call, I thought I was pretty good. I didn't think I was great, but I was like mind blown at how little I actually knew. And I think you're right. We are going to have to embrace, and the people who can really embrace how to leverage it are going to succeed. But it'll be interesting to see if you start spreading that out. And I know kind of lower in organizations, you have those big like 25 and 30 direct report structures. That's really hard on both the accountability part and the development part when you have that many. How do you give time to that many people? That's a proactive way and see what's going on.
I don't know what it's going to look like, Craig, but I know it's going to change. And as we think about the big essence of leadership, right? As we talked about choice, movement, and impact, on the choice side, there's going to be directions pointed at, visions, stated. And then the movement is going to happen, from the people that can make it happen versus sort of layers in between that feed the communication down. And ultimately, it'll be a circle relationship with sort of the impact and results impacting the next choices we make. The future will be different. And back to the lesson of like, will I let this current context, define me or drive me? Here's another point, right? Let's drive. Let's lean in. There's some organizations that are, encouraging people to use AI, and we're going down an AI path here, but there are some organizations that are encouraging people to experiment with AI, but most are not, right? And so it's still like you are interested, and so you began to explore, and so other people are, exploring. But how do we really lean in and understand how we can leverage it as a leader and as a professional?
Yeah, and I know even within people I work with, they're leaning into asking AI questions about what to do in different, not just like, how do I figure out this Excel spreadsheet. It's like interpersonal problems, or how do I approach my boss with this? And all these kind of things that are starting to fill in on that, which hopefully that's all good lessons they're pulling out of that. I guess we'll see.
Craig, they're coming for you and I, right?
That's all right.
I mean, I don't think it'll be hard to imagine almost any profession that won't be impacted. And so as we think about leading in this AI evolution, we need to think about what do we truly bring in a profession, in a role, and how do we, leverage the things that are uniquely the services, the capabilities that we bring forward. So there's, coaching. Today, you and I can go to ChatGPT and we can ask it a question and it'll give us an answer, right? But then there's a way that Craig coaches. And so maybe you can begin to think about tailoring some sort of Craig PA chatbot, right? That would be your voice. But then there's sort of these like specific scenarios that I think would benefit from the human connection. So I see the short term, as an opportunity to leverage both, right? What can AI bring us, but also what can we do together that makes it even better? Think about the book I just read, Steal Like an Artist. Creativity is a great spot where I think we can play with AI, but ultimately bring some of the humans together.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So going back, so take either of those two roles, that personal or first professional leadership role.
Yeah.
How did that go for you? What were your big takeaways from that role?
Let's go to the professional one. I had this role. It was a new role at a startup. I had a team, but the team reported, it was sort of a dotted line to me, but they reported up into their regional place around the country. And so I was forming this new role. People were repeating the role. And, there was a lot of autonomy. And so, again, we leaned in, we did what we need to do to meet the results. And I really enjoyed, that role. But around 2001, right, as the bubble burst, the big lesson I learned there was ultimately results matter. And I was caught up in a round of layoffs, and, as a young professional, that is a hit. Your ego isn't doing well at that point because, you left college, you're all in, you're given, working extra hours, and you feel pretty good about yourself. You're getting a paycheck. But it was a really good reminder for me that you've got to pay attention to your results. And it's not that I wasn't paying attention to my results. I think it's as it relates to the context and, the people around you, and having control over ultimately, your career that you own, right? Other people, if you rely too much on other people, you give up some of that control. So that was my ultimate lesson, right? Is that results matter.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
Imagine that.
And it sounds like one of those really rough roles where you kind of are in charge, but aren't in charge. And how do you get things done when you don't have a title to kind of thrust forth when all else fails?
I think that's the essence of leadership, right?
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, sure. Certainly in the old traditional model of leadership, if you're on top of an org chart, you've got a bit more influence in sort of that power structure. But I think the essence of leadership really is sort of, regardless of your position, your role, your title, how do you lead from where you are? That movement piece, how do you gain the persistence and the conviction to get others to carry along? Because then, Craig, they're not just doing it because you told them to, but they're doing it because they want to, because they're engaged in it. They're empowered. That's leadership.
It's so interesting, like influence and leadership, and kind of where those two come together is so often, I have clients I talked to recently where, is a person in the staff who's everybody kind of followed, but not for good results. This person was kind of a jaded person and they had an outweighed influence. They didn't have a title. They didn't have authority, but they influenced that whole organization by the way they showed up and just because of their personality and everything else, which is a really tricky problem to manage. But it also shows you that you don't have to have a title to lead an organization. How you show up every day, the choices you make, the way you encounter and engage is really leadership in and of itself without maybe the responsibility.
Yeah, I love it.
So now you've got the whole company, you're leading the whole company, crazy times that we're all dealing with right now, and especially like in the not-for-profit and higher ed space that you're working with. How are you showing up as a leader today? How have you grown over the years in your leadership style?
We've got a team of about 35 people here at MOR. They are all, solid humans trying to do the right thing. And I'm grateful to be able to work with, such a great team. And I think whether it's way back when I was running around as a youth with a lot of autonomy, or now, I think who you surround yourself with matters. That's number one, because it becomes a place where I can be authentic. I can be transparent. We've created a space where I can make mistakes and people will share their feedback with me, but have grace. It's a place where I can be honest in that balance of like what the current context means to us and our clients, but also lay out a strategy that they have trust in. And so I'm grateful for the work that we've done for years to get to where we are today, right? It doesn't happen overnight, that type of environment.
Yeah. And especially a team that's really working around kind of leadership coaching and leadership development. And leaders are always under a magnifying glass, but you're the leader of a leadership company.
Yeah. I do feel a little pressure there. I do.
Yeah. I mean, what does that bring for you?
Yeah. Well, I feel like I got to model it, right? I hope, as we've talked about throughout this conversation, good leaders do need to model the behaviors and practices they want others to adopt. And I do feel a little bit extra of that pressure, but it's worth it because on one hand, I'm a practitioner of leadership, but my other role is I get to, facilitate these leadership programs. And so I get to talk to developing leaders about mistakes that I've made, and they can learn, like you introduce your podcast, that like others can learn about the mistakes we've made along the way and hopefully not make them. But it's great. It's like living in a learning lab, 24/7. Because by the way, at home, I also get good feedback about my leadership or lack thereof. Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah. Craig, did I tell you I have three teenage daughters? Did I tell you that?
No.
They're wonderful, but they're good at giving feedback too.
It's a leadership opportunity. So not probably in my normal questions, but just given the nature of what you do, and you have clients who are really going through a lot of change right now, what are you seeing as some of the challenges of people going through this tumultuous change? And what are some of the one or two things people going through that could be thinking about right now to kind of get through to the other side?
Well, there's a couple of answers there. And I'll start with the second part. I was at a workshop last week with leaders from a handful of institutions, and they were talking about this very thing, and they were seeking advice, right? What do we do when, we're finding out news the same time our team is, right? And they come to us and they ask us questions like, what's this mean? What's going to happen? What are we supposed to say? And I think in that moment in time when things are tough, it's not necessarily about what you're supposed to say, right? As a leader, we put too much pressure on ourselves and carry the weight and having to have all the answers, when really we can flip it and listen, right? And ask, what's on your mind, right? Exhibit some empathy and let people share sort of the scenarios and the concerns they have. But I think just as quick as we can press the empathy button and be there for people when they need to share and they need to express themselves. As a leader, this is where the impact piece comes in. We need to shift that eventually to, so what do we want to do about that? There's some things that are in our control, and there are some things that are not in our control. And let's focus on the things that are in our control, and let's do something about that. So we want to show up for people, we want to be there for people, but we don't want to just be a sounding board, a venting, source. We've got to point that at a direction. And it's okay to not have the answers, Craig. That was the biggest concern that people had, is they felt like they needed to have the answers. But it's okay to not know the answers. But it's not okay to sit on that, right? We want to figure out the things that matter to us and then go try to find out more information.
Yeah, that's so crucial to think about when you're going through really difficult times is, what can I control? What can I influence? Where do I need to get feedback? And then work to find an answer. And it's so interesting. People think that you do, but leaders don't have the magic answer. Like we don't just have it right out of the gate. And frankly, we're so far removed sometimes from a lot of what's going on that we need to say, all right, let's start setting the parameters. What can we control? What do we need to know? Gather that information in, and then work towards making an informed decision so that we can really take the team forward. And that empathy piece you mentioned is part of that listening and learning and letting them kind of tell you what's going on and empathize with the challenge. Then say, all right, this is great. We are working on a solution, or at least the first set of answers and what we're going to do. And then we'll get back to you.
You got it correct. And the beauty of the process you described is that people were part of that. They were informing that. And so when we come back, they're now part of the story. It's not that like, you're coming back and you're giving them some version they never heard of, right? They've informed it. So that's, again, the work of leadership is also about listening. And it reminds me of the earlier question we had about defining leadership, right? Is that we're sort of breaking a mold of what many people thought was a leader or what, leadership was by talking about and modeling some of these things.
Yeah, I love it. It's, the number of times if I had a nickel for every time I've said to somebody, like, people want to be heard. And if they feel heard, they're okay. Maybe they're not thrilled, but they're okay if it doesn't go the way they think, as long as they're heard. And that's such an important piece for leaders. I think of a leader that I had who, set up his office so far away from it where anybody was. You couldn't even make eye contact if you're walking by, and he never kind of walked the room. And when you're completely shut off and inaccessible, it's really hard when it gets to crisis mode to pull people together. We've got to be, as much as we can, so much of being there is you have to make the time to be in front of your people as a leader in a real way, not standing up on a stage and just talking at them.
Yep. Craig, I love what you're saying. And I'm concerned because as I watch from afar, the clients that I work with, they were all together, at the center of the organization. And then because different cost issues or whatever, their department got moved out. And so they're, in some offsite building, and then COVID happened and now they're all at home. And so as you think about that piece, you talked about the relationship piece, that is going further and further away. We don't have the water cooler anymore. So people have to be more intentional about building those relationships. And the second thing tied to what you said, I really appreciate. There's a colleague of mine, he has a quote that kind of capitalizes on what you said there, that, people don't mind change if they're part of it. And that's exactly what you said. And so if we can build those relationships, we can, engage them in the changes that are happening all around us. They'll feel empowered. They'll feel some of that autonomy, tying it back earlier to engage and lead from where they are.
Love it. All right. We always close, Sean, with one last opportunity for you to jump in a time machine, go back in time to Sean in that first leadership role. What's the one piece of advice you'd give him that would make it easier, make him more effective, make the burden easier to carry, however you want to characterize it? What's your one piece of advice for young Sean?
Well, we hit on the results matters piece. So I'm gonna take this pass to give a second one. And I guess it would be keep going. As I reflect on my own journey and the many that I'm lucky enough to walk alongside with, it's hard sometimes, Craig. And we need people around us. We need reminders to keep going, and to take that next step, to get up when you fall. And so ultimately, that's what I would choose. Keep going. Keep going, kid. You got this.
Just keep plugging. All right. Well, Sean, if people want to connect with you, follow you, what are the best ways for them to do that?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/McDonald Sean, or you can jump out to our website at morassociates.com, MOR Associates.com. Those are two ways.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing the story of your executive evolution with us, Sean. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig. It's been a pleasure, and I'm grateful for what you're doing, trying to get lessons out there for everyone to gain. So thank you.
That was a great interview. I really enjoyed kind of even the side trip we took down talking about AI and what that's going to mean for leaders. And we'll touch base on that here in just a second as we jump into the key areas and the key takeaways for me in the areas of competence, confidence, and calm in this episode of Executive Evolution. One, competence. Stay on top of trends. As we discussed today, AI is going to have major impact on what it means to be a leader, not to mention all the things it's going to do for us in our organization. So to build our confidence, we really need to embrace and get a hold of what's going on and what's changing and what it means for us and for our teams. Two, in the area of confidence, one of the things that I learned early on when we became part of JP Morgan Chase was I needed to know my numbers. There was no meeting I went to where it wasn't drilled down into me. And that's one of the things that Sean talked about in knowing results. You really have to be able to be on top of your results, measure them, and know them intimately. And then finally, in the area of calm, as I talked about in the intro and as we talked about in the interview, you don't have to have all the answers, especially right away as a leader. You have to set the stage to say, hey, look, we are going to get the information that we need. We are going to work on the things we can control, and make decisions to move forward from there after we talk to everybody who can help us start to drive to some of these answers. That's how you can retain calm both in yourself and in your organization. Remember, you can go from being an accidental leader to the greatest leader of all time. All it takes is developing your confidence, competence, and calm. Thanks.